Regardless of how you define your company, by the industry and sector that you compete in, by your customers, by your technologies, there's one thing that's common to all of us, and that is we share, unfortunately, a common competitor known as the counterfeiters. This is a very sobering concept when you think that for all the good work you do to create demand for your products, some of that demand is being filled by someone else's supply. And the value proposition of the counterfeiters, you know, they don't compete on quality, obviously, but for price and schedule, it's a very attractive proposition for many of the unsuspecting customers that we have. So when we talk about transforming industry, this topic is all about how do we collectively fight back? How do we safeguard our supply chains, adopt the strategies and the technologies that we need to fight the counterfeiters and protect our common customers? The perspective that I'm going to provide is really from Johnson & Johnson in the healthcare space, but it does apply, I think, universally to all of you, regardless of the industry and sector that you're in. A little bit of background. We've been around 125 years. We've got a large and global footprint, and we compete in a wide variety of products that serve the healthcare needs of the world. Fortunately, we're guided in our anti-counterfeiting efforts by our corporate credo, which basically says our first responsibility as a company is to everyone who benefits from the use of our product, particularly in healthcare. So that's the call to action that we use. The other unfortunate circumstance of a large and global company is that we do use a lot of intermediaries. We do have a global footprint, as I mentioned, and the stakeholders are far and wide. So to coordinate anti-counterfeiting efforts across all these stakeholders, all the distributors, the external manufacturers, is a monumental challenge, probably not unlike your own businesses and industries. We start with a definition, and basically somebody's trying to fool a consumer or a customer that the product that they're about to buy is really yours. It's not a genuine, but it purports to be. In the healthcare space, the World Health Organization went a little bit deeper and said, well, there are a lot of other aspects of this because we really want to define what's a counterfeit as opposed to an authorized generic. Okay, but I think it's pretty clear to us that what's labeled as a counterfeit, regardless of definition, is again that issue that it's not our product, but someone's pretending to be our product by the package or how it mimics the originals. If your product, your company doesn't face this issue, very cynically, you either don't have good products or you're not paying attention. Because we have seen counterfeits in every sector, every part of business, and again, the statistics are few and far between because obviously the counterfeiters don't report, we don't get their strategic plans, so we don't really know where they're competing. But by some estimates, $650 billion worth of global trade has been the work of the counterfeiters. So the counterfeiters are enjoying $650 billion of annual trade at your expense. And why is this? Well, the challenge has many dimensions. Why are we all being violated? Why is our supply chain at risk? Well, free trade's a good thing. Global economy is generally a good thing, but it comes with its challenges. As we go into other markets and set up our factories, provide the know-how, the tooling, printing plates, and so forth, we're lending our intellectual property to those who perhaps aren't as judicious in safekeeping those assets as we have been. So as you get this global network of suppliers, raw material suppliers, external manufacturers, distributors, printers, and so forth, the challenge becomes a very large and difficult one to control. And we're going to talk about that. Control and visibility into your supply chain is the answer. answer to many of these challenges. But you can go down the list. Unlike the old days where we envision a counterfeiter being a garage operation by a couple of people making really sloppy product, poor labeling, not so anymore. These are well-funded, technologically advanced, organized criminals who understand global trade. They might counterfeit for their neighborhood and their local environment, but more often than not, they're sending this product elsewhere. And you'll see that in a couple of slides. But the profitability is there. The reward to risk is very high. Not enough of a deterrent, of a penalty, particularly when they're inserting their goods in the middle of a large supply chain and they're gone by the time you authenticate at the end of the chain. Legislation is fueling cross-border trade. And again, that works into the hands of the illegal diverters, the gray market traders, and the counterfeiters. But the most important thing, what can we control? We can control our supply chain. By tightening up the legitimate supply chain, it weakens the illegitimate chain. So the control and visibility is probably our best defense, because you can't stop counterfeiting. You can only stop it from entering into the normal supply chain and reaching your customers. So we do have some statistics. This is a report just published last week by the Department of Homeland Security. Again, one small snapshot of what's seized at the U.S. borders. And this shows that the value of those seizures in 2011 compared to the prior year is up 24%. We often hear statistics that the growth of counterfeiting is in that range of 20% per annum. I don't know about you, but I wish we had a growth rate of that magnitude. And if you look at the categories, they're diverse. Again, it's not that counterfeiters pick one category. These are crimes of opportunity. If you have good products, high volume, high demand, chances are somebody's paying attention to that. The other statistic from Homeland Security at the borders is that when you look at some of the trending on how product is shipped into this country, or to any country for that matter, it's not just the big containers that we always think of. If somebody seizes a container because the documentation wasn't right, a lot more use of postal services and express services. Now, DHS explains this saying, well, they're more diligent now, so they're finding more, which is sort of good news and bad news. Does that mean they weren't looking before? So are you finding more, or is it truly the volume has gone up? It's probably a combination of both. When you look at where the source countries are that are shipping this stuff in, this is not an indictment, it's a fact that Greater China, where there are many operations, many production facilities, account for about 80% of the source of the seized goods. Okay? No surprise. So when we try to digest this and say, what are those vulnerabilities that we need to work on as an industry, again, it starts with the control and visibility being increased. If you think about how our supply chains originated, as marketers, we want to spread our product as far and wide as we can, as quickly as we can. We want to sign up lots of intermediaries, a lot of distributors, a lot of tech support and so forth. We want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to purchase our products. Well, therein lies both a visibility and a control challenge, because typically we would lose sight of the product once we lose title to it. So we really don't know all the intermediaries handling the product. And you can go down the list, reverse logistics. Many of you have liberal returns policies. So you bring product back. Do you authenticate that product you return? Imagine if you brought back counterfeit goods unknowingly and restocked them and reshipped them. It could happen. Okay? The internet is problematic because nobody governs that. If your business has regulations, chances are those regulations are less impactful in internet trade, and so on and so forth. So The response that Johnson & Johnson has used is create a business discipline around brand protection. If you think of the evolution of this space, it was generally you see something and you investigate and go after the bad guys. Very tactical response, hopefully immediate response, but each episode was unlinked to all the others. A security function, basically, or trademark violation, so you get the legal teams involved. But now what we see is that this has grown to the point where it has to be integral to supply chain management, to R&D, to the commercial teams, to quality, to everybody that drives your business. We need to make sure that we're paying attention from the standpoint of putting in place all the protection that we can muster from the people, the process, and the technologies. Our call to action, as I mentioned, is all about the safety of your customers. But right up there, along with that obligation, is to protect your business value and the image and reputation of your brands. So it really does come back to this, back to the basics. What do we need to do with the people in our organization and the stakeholders that share that responsibility upstream and downstream? What are the processes that need to be either adjusted or invented to help with the safeguards? And then, of course, the technology. We'll spend a little bit of time on the technologies that are out there. But if you remember anything else from this talk, it's basically we need more technology. We can't possibly cover this with people watching other people or watching transactions. Technology has to aid us. Okay? The bottom part of this slide is very important. The good news here is, as industry segments, we are aligned in this fight. The collaboration across competitors in this space has been very significant. And then when you bring the public sector in to work with governments, regulators, and so forth, and the enforcement agencies, there is this commonality of purpose. And that's been very encouraging to see that across all these industries. You know, there is no competitive advantage when it comes to supply chain integrity. There should not be. We all have a common obligation to our patients, our consumers, our customers. So you have a best practice, share it. I have a best practice, we share it. And that's what's very powerful about bringing together the industry around this purpose. So after a lot of research and benchmarking, we came up with a list of 10 best practices in the supply chain, and they're listed there. And each one of these has a methodology and has some metrics and technologies and so forth. But generally, when you look at it across the people, process, and technology, each of these best practices involves combining all three of those pieces to make it happen, to make it real. With technology, until now, we really have only two modalities of technology. The first generation is you want to authenticate your product. And again, this was a lot easier in the days when counterfeiters had sloppy workmanship. So it's basically point authentication. At some point, you have a suspect product, you examine it, maybe you send it to a lab, you do some testing on it, and you say, yes, it's good, or no, that's not our product. So that is around the product and the package, is it genuine? On the other side of the chart, it's really about tracking the movement, the custody of that product. And that implies it's more real time. And done correctly, you might be able to spot where that counterfeit product or subassembly or raw material was injected into the supply chain. Flow visibility. And when both of these are working in harmony, then you've got the best of both worlds. The old days would be you'd put a hologram on your product, on your label, and say, okay, we fooled them, they can't replicate that. Well, we've seen evidence where holograms were put on fake versions of our product where we don't have it on the genuine. They're just showing off. Okay? So again, it's technology around the ongoing real-time visibility into trade. And there will be some combination of these things at play. As Andy mentioned earlier, The mobile devices play into this because everyone has a mobile device that they could interrogate, a unique serial number, a batch, some code that would signal, yes, that looks good or not, and give that instant feedback to the buyer or the trader. So, what can we do together as an industry in forums like this to transform the industry? Well, first becomes the mindset. The cultural shift that we need to say, we don't tolerate any of it. Not one instant is allowable. 100% integrity of our supply chain. And hold your business partners and your suppliers and your traders, even your customers, accountable for that. Influence the regulations as they apply to securing the supply chain, whether it be legislation, regulation, or standards that, again, build walls around the legitimate supply chain. Implement technologies that make sense. It's a new game. Yes, they cost money, but maybe there are collateral benefits you can derive around inventory management, around new product tracking, around marketing information, market intelligence, to open up the realm of your downstream supply chain and benefit from all the business value that comes back to you along with the protection. And then perhaps we need to change our business models, where a safe passage of material through scanning is what triggers a financial obligation back and forth. So you scan the product, it's legitimate, that triggers the financial exchange. To summarize, it's a large and growing problem, and chances are it's affecting everybody in this room, either as your role in your companies or as consumers. We all have a shared responsibility to get this right, to increase our understanding of the problem, to share best practices and to work together with the governments and with our industry partners to make sure that we're doing all we can to protect the supply. We need to build internally capabilities and competencies around this. Someday this will be a university curriculum. Supply chain integrity is part of supply chain management. The call to action right now is to implement best practices as best you know them. And maybe they're only good practices. There's a maturity model to be developed here. And wherever you are, there's probably more you can do. We need to be proactive and not reactive. And lastly, let's take a look at our business models. Are we ignoring the fact that a counterfeiter can inject product into our supply chain, or product can be diverted away into the gray market without our knowing, because our business models are built upon the inherent trust that we have for all of our trading partners. Now it becomes trust with verification. Thank you.